in this oral communication called the Diversity of Linguistic Experience and Language Regulation in my Lingual Mind. And this is a joint work with Pedro Mariota da Silva and Judy Kroll from the University of California, Irvine. Let me see if I can pass my slides here. So, how do bilinguals juggle two languages? We know that both languages are co-activated when we are producing language, and we've known that for quite some time. And we also know that bilinguals negotiate this competition through language regulation or language control. So the adaptive control hypothesis by Green and Abutalebi predict the ways cognitive resources are recruited during language processing are largely shaped by their social environments. So it makes sense to look at social environments in which bilinguals are immersed in order to understand the mechanisms that regulate language control. Bilinguals who speak the same two languages but live in different interactional contexts may experience different environmental demands that shape their cognitive and linguistic processes. So Abutalebi and Green predict that single language context, dual language context, and dense code switching context pose different demands for language regulation. So if you are bilingual and you are immersed in single language context, for instance, if you have you use one language at home and one language at work or at school, for instance, languages are totally separate. Even though you are a bilingual person, the languages are separated. They are used in separate contexts, which means that there is less need for control. Dual language contexts and dense code switching contexts, on the other hand, are contexts in which there is more need for language regulation, depending on how intense your communication or interaction with speakers of other languages are. So our main claim is that heritage speakers regulate the co-activation of their two languages in ways that are different from other bilinguals. These differences emerge across multiple levels of language production and are shaped by their unique language experiences. So our investigation, our focus is on what role does the linguistic environment or interactional context play in the bilingual mind and brain. And in this study, we tested three different contexts. So we tested heritage speakers' language regulation comparison to other bilingual groups. So instead of just considering everyone bilingual, we separated bilinguals into different groups depending on language use. So first we looked at the heritage speakers of English, Spanish speakers who are English bilinguals. We had 49 participants. Who live in California. So these participants are bilinguals who learned Spanish at home, and that was their first language, but then eventually they became English dominant because living in California, they ended up becoming English dominant. At the same time, they have plenty of opportunities to code switch. They code switch all the time because they live at home, they have a close contact with their family. So even though they're dominant in English, their use of Spanish is very, very intense. The other group of bilinguals that we tested are international students at UCI. So they're Mandarin English bilinguals. They live in California, but they are international students, and they are late bilinguals because they came to the United States to study at university. They are more Mandarin proficient, but they are immersed in English, right? Even though they kept Mandarin, they are still immersed in English, and they have learned English at a later age. And we had 61 participants for that. The third group is Portuguese English bilinguals who live in Brazil. They are also late bilinguals, which means they have learned English after their Portuguese system was very consolidated, and they live in a monolingual context. They live in Brazil. They speak English, they watch series, they have, some contact. Some of them have a lot of contact. They have different levels of proficiency, but they are still dominant in Portuguese, and this is the context in which they use languages totally separate. Right? There is no dense code switching. There is no need for juggling the two languages in the same way that people who are immersed in English in environments need. So our study design contained two sessions with several different tasks. So we had the questionnaire, the bilingual language profile, and brokering background. We also had verbal fluency to decide on language dominance, and we had a picture description in which we are going to analyze speech connectedness. And today I'm going to bring the results for the picture naming and AXCPT only. But they also did elicited imitation tests. So it's a very large study. We are now analyzing all this data. So in the battery of tasks, we can see some of the examples: the bilingual language profile from Birdsong, the semantic verbal fluency, and the elicited imitation task. We also have used a very interesting brokering questionnaire to understand language experience, we expect the heritage speakers to have a much more intense brokering experience in comparison with the other participants. We also had a picture description for which we're going to analyze using speech graphs. And these are the two tasks that I'm going to be talking about today, which is the picture naming, it's a lexical production task, and the AXCPT, which is a cognitive control assessment. So for this, for these tasks these two tasks are the ones that we used with a control context in session 2. So some of the participants did picture naming first and then AXCPT. Some of the participants did AXCPT and then picture naming first. And we wanted to see the effects of training in that. So first, let's talk about entropy. So what we found is that regarding the entropy score, the heritage bilinguals here in orange showed the most balanced language use between the two groups, right? With the family group showing the highest entropy, which may suggest that linguistic mixing or diversity depends more on the community than on other contexts for the heritage speakers, right? As expected, the Brazilian and the Mandarin participants did not have, a lot of entropy in the family context. The Brazilians speak English mainly in the study or work context, right? So they do differ in their language use. So we investigated whether there was some effect of cognitive training because we manipulated the order of the tasks. So as I said, some of the participants did AXCPT and then they did picture naming, and some of the participants did picture naming first and then AXCPT. Picture naming had 3 different conditions. It's a lexical production task, but they had language mixing and they had language blocks and mixed conditions, right? So we manipulated the order in which participants were exposed to the text with the purpose of assessing whether environmental demands, in case of the tasks, the environmental demands to switch languages may train regulatory mechanisms involving bilingual speech production. as a proxy of a second language immersion or a code switching experience, right? And then we asked whether we can induce training effects on cognitive control by imposing switching demands within a single experimental session, right? And the results are very, very interesting. So what we found, the BSI scores by study group are the results which reveal if they go above 0, they're proactive. If they're below 0, they are more reactive, right? And what we found is that across 3 groups, the Brazilian, the Heritage, and the Mandarin, there are training effects for those who mix languages before ACPT. So we found a training effect. And we also found that the heritage speakers are the one who show the least amount of training. So we can see here, so the red ones are the ones who did AXCPT first, and the blue ones are the ones who did picture naming first, right? So Brazilian participants who did AXCPT first had a very different behavior in terms of showing proactive control than the ones who did picture naming first. So picture naming affected their proactive control behavior. The same happened with Mandarin speakers. So there is a huge training effect, right? So Mandarin were basically reactive in the AXCPT first, but then when they received the Mandarin speakers, when they received picture naming first, there was a training effect. The heritage group, on the other hand, they show the least amount of training, right? In comparison to the other two. So what we can see is that these regulatory mechanisms involved in bilingual speech production are highly adaptive to the demands of the environment. So what do these preliminary data suggest to us? Our hypothesis is that speakers of heritage languages may be adopting a sort of an open control mode, which describes a state of linguistic cooperation in which bilingual speakers activate both languages simultaneously during code switching, resulting in lower cognitive processing costs during switching than in competitive mode, which does not depend on inhibition, a behavior that has been observed in communities where languages are deeply connected. In other words, our results reveal the dynamic and adaptive nature of the bilingual experience and suggest that the diversity of linguistic experience has consequences for bilingual cognition. These are, here are our references, and thank you.